Georges Simenon, Sail by Candlelight. Maigret pushed back his plate. Then his stool. He stretched, instinctively lifted the lid of the skillet, and said with a grunt, "Back to work, children. We're getting to bed early tonight." Those sitting around the massive inn table looked at him submissively. Frederic Michaud, the innkeeper, bristling with a 3-day beard, was the first to stand and head for the bar. "What can I—" "No, enough," Maigret exclaimed. "White wine, Calvados, white wine again. That's plenty." Everyone had reached that stage of exhaustion where the eyelids begin to burn. Julia, Frederic's wife, carried the remains of the red beans to the kitchen. Therese, the young maid, wiped her eyes. It wasn't because she was crying. She simply had a cold. "Where do we start?" she asked. "With me clearing the table?" "It is 8 o'clock in the evening. We start from there. Then I'll go get the tablecloth and the cards." The inn was warm, even sweltering, while outside in the darkness, the wind drove gusts of icy rain. "Sit where you were then, Father Nicholas, and you, Monsieur Grue, you hadn't arrived yet." The innkeeper cut in. Just as I heard his footsteps, I told Therese, "Put the cards on the table." "Do I have to act out my entrance again?" grumbled Grue, a peasant nearly 6 feet tall and built like a country sideboard. One might have thought they were actors rehearsing the same scene for the 20th time. Movements were sluggish, gazes vacant. Maigret, acting as director, sometimes found it hard to believe the reality of what was happening. And then there was the place itself. Did he ever think he'd spend 3 days stuck in and lost in the middle of the Vente marshes, miles from any living soul? The place was called Pont du Grau, and there truly was a bridge there, a long wooden structure spanning a sort of silted canal that the sea flooded twice a day, though the sea itself remained invisible. All one could see were the marshes and, somewhere on the horizon, the flat roofs of farms, what they called huts in these parts. Who needed a roadside in here? Duck hunters? Near the building stood a red-painted gas pump, and on the wall, a giant, bright blue advertisement for a brand of chocolate. Across the bridge lay the long, single-story buildings of a large farm, the Grue Estate. January 15th, at noon, in a place known as Muletier, public auction, dwelling house, 30 hectares of flood meadows, movable and immovable property, agricultural implements, furniture and kitchenware, cash sale. It all began with that notice. Until then, for many years, every evening at the inn had looked exactly like the last. Old Nicholas would arrive, always half-drunk, and before sitting down with his usual mug of beer, would stop at the bar for a quick glass. Then Grue would trudge over from his residence. Therese would cover the table with a red cloth and bring out the cards and tokens. Then they would wait for the fourth, the customs officer, and if he didn't show, Julia would take his place. On that day, the 14th of January, the eve of the auction, there were 2 other guests at the inn, peasants who had traveled from afar for the sale, Borchain, from near Angoulême, and Kennett, from St. Jean-Dingeley. "One moment," Maigret said, seeing the innkeeper about to shuffle the cards. Borchain went to bed around 8, right after dinner. "Who showed him to his room?" "I did," Frederic replied. "Had he been drinking?" "A bit, but he'd had a few too many. He asked me who that gloomy character was. I told him it was Grue, the man whose property was being sold off. Then he wanted to know how a man like Grue managed to go broke owning such magnificent meadows. And I— "Enough," Grue growled. The giant was sullen. He refused to accept that he had never seriously tended to his land or his livestock, instead blaming heaven itself for his bankruptcy. "Fine. Now, who saw Borchain's wallet that night?" "Everyone," they answered. He pulled it from his pocket during dinner to show a photo of his wife. The wallet was stuffed with cash. Besides, everyone knew. He was here for the auction, and the notice said, "Cash only, and you, Monsieur Cannot? Did you also have over 100,000 francs on you?" 150,000. I wasn't prepared to pay a cent more. From the moment he arrived, Maigret, who was then leading the flying squad out of Nantes, had been watching Frederic Michaud with furrowed brows. Michaud, a man of about 45 in a polo shirt with a broken nose of a prize fighter, looked very little like a country innkeeper. "Tell me, don't you think we've met somewhere before?" "Why waste time? You're right, Commissioner. But I'm straight now. Vagrancy in the Turnus district, brawls and assaults, forged mortgages and looting vending machines. In short, Frederic Michaud, better known to police as Fred the Boxer, had suddenly resurfaced as an innkeeper in Pont du Grau, the most godforsaken hole in the Vade. You probably recognize Julia. Too, we were sent down together 10 years ago. But you'll see for yourself, she's turned into quite the hostess. It was true. Julia, heavy, bloated, and untidy, with greasy hair and down-at-the-heel shoes, scurried back and forth between the bar and the kitchen. There was nothing left of the girl from the place de Turnus, but surprisingly, she was an excellent cook. We took in Therese, an orphan from the asylum. The girl was about 18, thin, tall, slightly snub-nosed, with moody mouth and a vacant stare. "Are we playing for real?" asked the customs officer, a man named Johnny. "Play exactly as you did then. And you, Kenneth, why didn't you go to bed?" "I was watching the game," the peasant muttered. "It means he was trailing me the whole time," Therese interjected spitefully, pestering me to promise I'd come to his room. Maigret saw Fred shoot Kenneth a murderous look, and Julia noticed it too. Well, then, everyone was in their place, just like that evening. It had been raining then, too. Borchane's room was on the ground floor at the end of the corridor. 3 doors open onto that hallway, one to the kitchen, one to the cellar stairs, and the third marked Room 100. Maigret sighed and rubbed his forehead wearily. Over the last 3 days, the smell of this house had soaked into him. Its atmosphere clung to him until he felt physically ill. But what else could he do? On the 14th, shortly before midnight, while the card game was still dragging on, Fred caught a scent and called Julia from the kitchen. "Did you leave something burning on the stove?" Then he stood up and opened the corridor door. "Oh, hell, I smell smoke." Gru and Therese rushed after him. The smell was coming from Borchane's room. Fred knocked, and then, since there was no lock on the door, he pushed it open. The hair mattress was smoldering slowly, and on that mattress, in his shirt and long johns, lay Borchane with his skull crushed. At 1 a.m, Maigret was notified by phone. By 4, through the pouring rain, with a red nose and frozen hands, he arrived at the scene. Borchane's wallet had vanished. The window in his room was closed. No one could have entered from the street, as Michaud kept a German shepherd of a very serious temperament in the yard. It was impossible to arrest everyone. Yet everyone was a suspect, except for Kenneth. He was the only one who hadn't left the bar all evening. "Carry on. I'm listening, I'm watching. Do exactly what you were doing on the 14th, at this very hour." The auction had been postponed. On the 15th, the commissioner ordered the indoors closed, but despite this, people had lingered outside all day. Now it was the 16th. Maigret had spent almost the entire time in the main room, leaving only for a few hours of sleep. The others had done the same. They were sick to death of looking at one another from morning till night, hearing the same questions and repeating the same hollow gestures. Julia was preparing food. Everything that existed outside then had been forgotten. It took a physical effort to imagine these people anywhere else. In a city, perhaps, ceasing their tireless repetitions. There, I've trumped his heart. Gru threw down his cards and said, "What's the point in playing? I missed a card in my hand. Just my luck." He stood up. "Stand up, Gru," Maigret commanded. "Do exactly what you did then." The giant shrugged his shoulders. "How many more times do I have to go to the latrine?" he grumbled. "Ask Frederick. Or Nicholas. On other nights, I go at least twice. What do you expect? What am I supposed to do with the 4 or 5 bottles of white wine I drink in a day?" He spat and headed for the doors. He walked down the corridor and kicked open the door marked 100. "Well, how much longer do I have to rot in there?" As long as it takes. And the rest of you, what were you doing while Gru was out? The customs officer let out a nervous snicker at Gru's fury. His laughter had a strange, rattling quality. He was the weakest of them all. Too high-strung. I told Jaunty and Nicholas there'd be trouble. Fred admitted. Over what? Gru and his farm. He kept thinking the auction wouldn't happen. That he'd managed to borrow the money when they put up the sale notice. He threatened the bailiff with a shotgun. At his age, having been a landowner all his life, it's not so easy to hire yourself out as a farmhand. Gru returned, drilling those present with a murderous glare. Now what? He shouted. Is that enough? Fine. I killed a man and lit the mattress, right? Just say it and throw me in jail. Because I can't take any more. Where were you, Julia? I don't think you were here. I was in the kitchen peeling vegetables. We expected a crowd for lunch because of the auction. And you, Therese? I went upstairs to my room. When? Just before Monsieur Gru came back. One moment. We'll go up together. The rest of you continue. Did you start a new game? Not right away. Gru didn't want to. I already told you, Fred said. He went to the bar for a pack of Gaulois. Come, Therese. The room where Borchain had been killed was indeed very conveniently located, barely 2 meters from the stairs. Consequently, Therese could have. It was a small room with an iron bed. On a chair lay a bit of linen and some clothes. What were you doing here? I was writing. Writing what? That by tomorrow we wouldn't have a single minute to ourselves. She looked him defiantly in the eye. Monsieur knows well enough what I'm talking about. I've seen in your questions and your looks. The old woman suspects. She follows us everywhere. I begged Fred to take me away from here, and we decided to leave in the spring. Why the spring? I don't know. That's what Fred decided. We were going to go to Panama, where he lived for a while, and open a bistro there. And how long were you in your room? Not long. I heard the old woman coming upstairs. She asked what I was doing. I said, nothing. She hates me, and I hate her. I'd swear she's guessed our plans. Therese met Maigret's gaze without flinching. She was one of those girls who knew what they wanted and knew how to get it. Don't you think Julia would rather see Fred behind bars than know he'd run off with you? That sounded like her. What was she doing in her room? Taking off her girdle. She has to wear an elastic girdle to keep what's left of her figure. Therese's sharp teeth brought to mind a small, vicious animal. When speaking of her predecessor in Fred's heart, her upper lip curled back predatorily. In the evenings, when she's overeaten, she always stuffs herself like a pig. The girdle starts to pinch, and she goes upstairs to take it off. And how long was she there? 10 minutes or so. When she came down, I started helping her peel vegetables. The others went on playing cards. Was the door from the hall to the kitchen open? It's always open. Maigret looked at her once more and began the heavy descent down the creaking stairs. In the yard, the dog could be heard rattling its chain. A pile of coal lay just beyond the cellar door. On it, the murder weapon had been found, a heavy sledgehammer used for breaking up the lumps. No fingerprints were discovered. The killer had evidently wrapped the handle in a rag. The rest of the house, however, including the knob of the door leading to the victim's room, was covered in a chaotic map of prints from everyone present on the night of the 14th. As for the wallet, a dozen men with vast experience in such matters had searched for it in the most improbable places. They had even called in the scavengers to pump out the cesspool. Poor Borchain had come from his village specifically to buy Gru's farm. Until now, he had only been a tenant. He wanted to finally be a master. He was married, with 3 daughters, after dining at one of the tables. He had spoken with Kennett, another potential buyer. He'd shown him the photo of his wife. Then, heavy with rich food and spirits, he had headed to his room with the characteristic gait of a peasant ready for sleep. He had likely tucked the wallet under his pillow. In the main hall, for men sipped wine and played belote as they did every evening. Fred grew old Nicholas, who turned a purplish blue when soaked in drink, and Jaunty, the customs officer. Behind them, straddling a chair, sat Canet, glancing back and forth between the cards and Therese, hoping she might provide some nighttime entertainment. In the kitchen, the two women worked over a bucket of vegetables, Julia and the little orphan girl. At some point, one of those people had stepped into the corridor under one pretext or another, opened the cellar door, grabbed a hammer, and entered Borchane's room. No one heard a thing. The killer couldn't have been gone long, as no one noticed their absence. Furthermore, the killer had to hide the wallet in a secure spot. Setting the mattress on fire was clearly a calculated move to create a diversion. The police would be called, and everyone would be searched. When I think that, on top of everything else, there isn't even a decent beer here, Maigret complained, returning to the bar. What he wouldn't give for a mug of fresh, foaming draft beer. Instead, then offered nothing but a vile swill they called home brew. What about the game? Fred glanced at the blue earthenware clock. He was used to police methods. Like the others, he was bone-tired. But he remained calm. 20-10. Not quite yet. We were still talking. Was it you, Nicholas, who asked for more wine? Probably. Go fetch the wine, I shouted to Therese. Then I got up and went down to the cellar myself. Why? Fred shrugged. Tough luck for me, right? Well, to hell with it. Let her hear it. When this is all over, life will go back to the way it was. I heard Therese going upstairs. I guess she'd written me a note and tucked it into the keyhole of the door. You hear that, Julia? It can't be helped. Old girl, I'm fed up to the teeth with your scenes, and the good moments are so rare. Kenneth turned red, while Nicholas let out a mocking laugh. Johnny lowered his eyes. He, too, had been sniffing around Therese. Was there a note? Yes. I read it downstairs while the bottle was filling. Therese just wrote that tomorrow we probably wouldn't have a single minute alone. Strangely, Fred's voice held a note of genuine passion, even an unexpected depth of feeling. Therese stood up abruptly and moved from the kitchen to the card table. It's over, isn't it? She said, her voice trembling. It would be better if you just arrested us all and threw us in prison. Then we'd see. But walking around like this in circles, with that look on your face, that look... She burst into sobs and, burying her face in her hands, turned toward the wall. And how long were you in the cellar? Maigret continued, unperturbed. 3 or 4 minutes. What did you do with the note? Burned it over a candle. Were you afraid of Julia? The word offended Fred. Don't you understand, Commissioner? You, the man who arrested us 10 years ago. Don't you realize that when people have been through things together... Well, have it your way. Don't take it to heart, my poor Julia. I'm not taking it to heart, came Julia's calm voice from the kitchen. Motive. Where was that famous motive they drone on about in criminology lectures? Everyone had a motive, especially Gru, who had nothing left to lose. The next day, his home was to be sold, and he would have found himself on the street. No furniture, no clothes, not a penny to his name. All that remained for him was to work as a laborer on someone else's farm. In this house, Gru knew every nook and cranny. The cellar entrance, the coal pile, the hammer, and Nicholas? Could he? He lived in bitter poverty, but he had a daughter, Inyor. She worked there as a servant, giving everything she earned to support her child. Couldn't he have done it? Certainly. Fred had just said that Nicholas was the one who chopped their wood and shoveled their coal every week. That evening, around 9, Nicholas had gone to the latrine, swaying drunkenly. Let's hope he doesn't mix up the doors, Johnny had remarked at the time. Such things happen. But why was it Johnny who noticed while shuffling the cards? And what about Johnny himself? Couldn't he have committed the crime when he followed Nicholas a few minutes later? True, he served in the customs house, but everyone knew he was unreliable, hanging around cafes, always looking for an opening. Tell me, Commissioner, Fred began. Wait, it is now 9:05. Where were you the day before yesterday at this time? Therese, sniffing, sat down and leaned her shoulders against her master's back. Were you here? Yes. I'd finished the vegetables. I picked up a sweater I'd started knitting, but I didn't actually work on it. Julia remained in the kitchen all this time, out of sight. You want to say something, Fred? Something just occurred to me. There's one thing that proves none of us could have killed him. No, that's not it. If I had killed someone in my own house, would it ever enter my head to start a fire? Why? To draw attention. Maigret had just packed his pipe and was unhurriedly lighting it. Pour me a glass of Calvados, Therese. If you please. As for you, Fred, why didn't you set fire to the mattress? Well, because... He faltered. If the fire hadn't started, no one would have noticed what happened. Everyone would have gone home, and... Maigret smiled, his lips stretching oddly around the stem of his pipe. Unfortunately, Fred, that proves exactly the opposite. The fire is the only crucial piece of evidence, and it caught my attention the moment I arrived. Let's assume that you, as you say, killed the old man. Everyone knows he's staying with you, so you can't even dream of hiding the body. The next morning, the door to his room must be opened and the police called. By the way, what time did he want to be woken up? 6 o'clock. He planned to inspect the house and land before the auction started. Exactly. So, if the body had been discovered at 6, only you, Julia, and Therese would have been in the house, not to mention Canet, whom no one would suspect. It wouldn't have crossed anyone's mind that the murder took place during the card game. Fred followed the commissioner's reasoning with strained attention. It seemed to Maigret that he turned pale. Fred even mechanically tore one of the cards and dropped the scraps to the floor. Careful. If you decide to play again, you'll be looking for the ace of spades in vain. As I was saying, what must be done to ensure the murder is discovered before Gru, Nicholas, and Johnny leave the inn, so that suspicion might fall on them? No one had a reason to look into that room. There was only one pretext. Fire. This time Fred stood up, tense, fists clenched, his gaze hard. Ah, damn it all, he cursed. Everyone fell into a frightened silence. Under the weight of exhaustion, they had, until this moment, stopped believing in the existence of a criminal. It no longer registered that the killer was here, in the house, that they were talking to him, eating at the same table, perhaps even playing cards and drinking with him. While Fred paced the room with long strides, Maigret sat with his head lowered and eyes closed. Had he finally found what he was looking for? For 3 days he had given them no respite, making them repeat the same gestures and words dozens of times in the hope that some forgotten detail would surface. But the main goal was to break their will, to drive the killer to the edge. The company heard the voice of the commissioner, calmly puffing on his pipe. The whole point is to find out who has a hiding place so secure that the wallet was impossible to find. Everyone present was thoroughly searched that very night. We raked through the coal at the cellar entrance, tapped the walls, inspected the barrels, but a wallet stuffed with 100,000 francs. Your pacing, Fred, is giving me seasickness. But damn it, don't you see that? That what? That it wasn't me who killed him. I'm not that far gone. I've already got enough on my record. And were you really planning to leave for South America with Therese in the spring and open a bistro? Fred turned toward the kitchen doors and asked through gritted teeth, what of it? And with what money? Fred looked Maigret straight in the eye. So that's where you're heading? You're on the wrong track, Commissioner. On the 15th of May, I'll have money anyway. Back when I was making an honest living organizing boxing matches, I had the sense to secure my future. I took out 100,000 franc insurance policy, payable when I turned 50, and that happens to be exactly the 15th of May. Did Julia know about this insurance? Women are concerned with such things. So, Julia, you didn't know Fred was due to receive 100,000 francs? No, I knew, she said. What? Fred cried, jumping up, and I knew he wanted to clear out with that creature, and you would have let them leave? Julia sat motionless, staring silently at Fred. There was a strange, internal stillness about her. "You haven't answered me," Maigret reminded her. Julia turned her gaze to the commissioner. Her lips trembled. Perhaps she wanted to say something important, but she only shrugged. Can anyone truly say what a woman will do? Fred wasn't listening to her. It was as if his thoughts had suddenly been seized by something else. Maigret felt their minds moving in the same direction. "Tell me, Fred." "What?" he asked, waking as if from a dream. "That insurance policy. The one Julia saw without your knowledge. I'd like to have a look at it myself." What a strange road the truth had chosen to take to reach the light. Maigret was certain he hadn't forgotten anything. Therese had told him in her room about the departure. But the money, it was so simple, so stupid. It was enough to make one burst with laughter. The house had been searched dozens of times, but neither the policy, nor identity papers, nor his military record had been found. "I'm at your service," Fred sighed with relief. "You can get acquainted with my savings, if you like." He headed for the kitchen. "You can come in. When you live in a hole like this. Not to mention, I have certain papers my old pals would love to pinch." Therese followed them in surprise. Then came the heavy footsteps of Gru. Kenneth stood up as well. "Don't think it's anything fancy. I just happened to be a tinsmith in my youth." To the right of the stove stood a massive galvanized iron trash can. Fred dumped its contents into the middle of the kitchen and knocked out the false bottom. He peered inside, and his eyebrows shot up in astonishment. He slowly raised his head, his mouth hanging open. Among the papers lay a large, worn wallet, bound with a red rubber band cut from a bicycle inner tube. "Well, Julia?" Maigret asked softly. For a second, it seemed to him that through the blurred lines of her face, something of a young Julia of old had resurfaced. She looked at each of them in turn. Her upper lip curled in a contemptuous grimace. One might have thought she was using that grimace to hold back tears. But she did not cry. "Well then, I'm ready," she said in a colorless voice. The most surprising thing was that Therese suddenly burst into sobs. She howled like a dog over a corpse. "I suppose you'll take me right away. Since you have a car, may I pack my things?" Julia asked. Maigret waited while she packed a bag. The commissioner was somber, the reaction to a long period of nervous tension. When had Julia found Fred's hiding place? Was it at the sight of the insurance policy he'd never mentioned that she realized the day he got that money he would leave with Therese? And then a chance had arrived, a sum even larger than the one Fred was expecting. She would have given him that money in a few days or weeks, once everything had quieted down. "Look, Fred, I knew everything. You wanted to leave with her, didn't you? Think I'm good for nothing now? Open your hiding place." "It was me, the old woman, as you call me." Maigret kept his eyes on her just in case, while she moved about the room, which contained nothing but a massive mahogany bed and a photograph of Fred the boxer hanging above it. "I need to take off my girdle," she said. "Don't look. It isn't a very pleasant sight." She sat in the car. Maigret stared fixedly at the raindrops sliding down the glass. What were they doing now, back at the inn? And who would get Gru's house when the third candle burned out?